Hello and welcome to Better Business Bureau's Smart Consumer. This is the premiere of our third season here on Nutmeg TV. Now, if this is the first time that you're joining us, Better Business Bureau's Smart Consumer will introduce you to experts in a number of sectors. Now, each one of them will tell you how to make educated marketplace decisions, explain ways to protect yourself against scams, and leave us with information we can apply to our everyday lives. Technology has become a big part of our lives. We interact with devices at home, at work, on the street, and it doesn't matter how old you are, from children to seniors. We are putting more and more of our lives into the hands of technology and its designers, developers, and sellers. Appropriately enough, today our guest is someone who can tell us to what extent we're connected, whether by wire or wireless, and how much of that puts us at risk. He has a Bachelor of Science in Information Systems. He's also the host of the mid-morning talk show on WATR in Waterbury, Steve Noxxon. Steve, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Howard.
Let's start at the top.
Okay.
When internet and high tech came into being in '95, when it became a consumer item, we could have never imagined how it would have evolved to what it is today. And it's evolved into a sophisticated but multi-edged sword. Are there things that are developing that, as consumers, we are ready for, but that we might not be secured against?
There's a lot of insecurity on the internet as it stands right now. So there's a lot of concern about adding to that with the so-called Internet of Things concept. You'll find that people are starting to think about products like the Alexa or the Echo, the Amazon Echo, or the Google, I think it's called an Alexa, where you, anywhere in your house, you can just say, hey, do this for me, and it will turn on your lights, it'll play a song for you, it'll do all of these things for you, and so it's very convenient.
Now, this is a little device for the folks who don't know. You put it down, you talk to it, and it can give you all sorts of information.
Right, you can ask it what the weather is, you can ask it what the traffic patterns are, you can ask it anything that you like, and it will go out and search that for you and bring back that information.
So it is connected to the internet.
All the time.
While we're talking to it or not.
Right.
Okay.
Some people are concerned that because of that connectivity, something could happen in your house that someone can overhear and use, either for marketing, not always for nefarious reasons, but certainly for reasons that you may not want them to use it for.
Right.
And so a lot of people are now recommending, turn that thing off. But then if you turn it off, why bother having it in the first place?
Right. So we're faced with a situation then that the average consumer is worried about email. They're worried about links on pages that they see on rogue websites. Mm-hmm. But we're actually buying things now for our homes. For example, a wireless thermostat, door locks, start our car remotely. That's been around for a while, but you can virtually control a vehicle from outside of it. Question number one is, how many hackers are there? Are we talking about a huge society of hackers that are required to do this?
Not really. It doesn't take a lot to hack into any system whatsoever. That's one of the problems that people are concerned about when it comes to the Internet of Things, is everything that is getting connected to the Internet. And we're talking numbers of anywhere from 8 to 25 billion objects are currently connected to the Internet. And these are just objects. I'm talking refrigerators, you mentioned the thermostat. They're expecting by 2020 that number to go up to maybe 50 billion objects. That's 50 billion access points to the Internet, to your home, to your live, to your router, to whatever. And if just one of those things is not secure, then that opens up the door for everything. And there was an actual example of this happening up in New Hampshire recently, maybe about a year ago. I don't know if you knew this happened, but HBO and Netflix and all of these other services were made inaccessible because someone had hacked into, did what's called a DDoS, or a
dedicated denial of
service, exactly. Or actually, it's a distributed denial of service. It comes from a lot of different places.
So in other words, as I understand it, this is when you get people who will network together infected computers,
right,
and overload websites.
But what they did was they actually hit this place. It's called Dyn, D-Y-N. I might be pronouncing it wrong. But they hit this organization that handles a lot of the traffic for the Internet with that DDoS, with about 1.5 million Internet requests, like over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And they were coming from all of these different devices. It wasn't people's computers that were infected that were causing this DDoS. It was their toasters, their refrigerators, their thermostats. Someone had figured out how to use those Internet of Things, Internet connected items that are great for convenience and turn those into actual bots that they use for an attack. And it actually caused quite a bit of a problem.
So essentially, up until now, we've had a cable come into our home or a telephone line that connected to our modem, and it gave us wireless service for our computers and whatnot. Now what we're talking about is that wireless signal is being spread to many devices in our homes. And I think before we came on the air, you explained it to me. It's sort of hundreds of doors have opened up in our homes when we install these things.
Right.
And there is not separate protection, robust protection for each of them.
Well, there's no standards, and that's the first problem we have, is that there's no standardization of any of these things. Now, as we're talking about it from a consumer level, also keep in mind it's on a manufacturing level, it's from a medical level, there's media issues involved here, there's liability issues involved when it comes to all of that stuff. But when it comes to what's in our home, there is no standard for any of this. So there's been some push. In fact, earlier this month, there was some legislation that was introduced in DC to force these manufacturers to start building in the security as they're building these devices, as opposed to following up later on and then patching them. Because that's what happens. You get these products that are being rushed to market, and they're finding these vulnerabilities in them, and then they have to patch them. And of course, they're patching them through the internet because it's connected to the whole world. But while that's still open, and look, hackers are good. Hackers, they're other than their ethics, they're brilliant. You know, I mean, they're really good at what they do. And once they find one of those weaknesses, they can exploit it, they can sell it, they can do anything they want with it. Now, I don't mean to scare people, because there are, if you want to weigh this out, probably the conveniences are far more helpful than these vulnerabilities. But they do exist, and so you've got to be careful on that. Keep in mind, too, that thermostat. Google bought that company. They're called Nest. Google bought them for a reason. Not because they thought they were going to make a lot of money, because those devices are connected to the internet. And what is Google going to do with all of that data? And that's where the other side of the coin is with this Internet of Things is. It's all about big data. They freely admit it. That's the media companies especially. They need data so they can very specifically target their marketing to someone like you. They know what your purchasing history is. They know what your preferences are. They know what you watch. They know what you listen to. And that's why Amazon with that Echo and Google with all of these other IoT devices, they're not using it maybe for nefarious purposes, but they are going to use it to target you with marketing.
Well, now wireless modems are just that, wireless, and that means radio waves.
Mm-hmm.
And radio waves can be intercepted very easy.
Mm-hmm.
They tell us to make complicated passwords, but a password doesn't really mean much to somebody who knows what they're doing, does it?
Not at all. I can park out in front of someone's house and I can figure out what their wireless password is.
It's that easy.
It's that easy.
So we can ostensibly, anyone who's had a baby monitor, for example, has more than likely heard a neighbor talking to their kid, maybe screaming at each other.
Well, and those are radio waves, and those are kind of a different thing.
Right.
They're not really internet-based. I mean, they could be. So you could be at work and you could be watching what's going on at home. You could be watching your nanny. You could be checking on things. So those type of things, yes, they're all vulnerable. But the question comes down to how well we protect our personal network, and how much of this Internet of Things, these billions and billions of access points, are going to be accessible to people who might not have your best interest at heart.
What's going to happen? I mean, there is no one fix for all the problems that we're seeing technologically, and the manufacturers are aware that the security is not as good as it could be. How do they start doing this? The hackers, as it's always said, are a couple of steps ahead of us.
Well, the one thing I think to keep in mind is the internet in and of itself is horrifically bad when it comes to security. Okay, so this isn't going to make it worse. Okay, so if you've not gotten hacked, if you've not gotten your system taken over, it's not going to probably lead to that. So we're not talking about something that is going to make the problem worse. It certainly isn't going to make the problem any better because of these additional massive numbers of new access points. So that's where we have to think, okay, right, we are at risk. There are things that need to be done, and like I said, there's legislation, which I'm not a big fan of legislation at all, but not always the solution to the problem, but at least it's a push in the right directions. One of the things I do see happening is a major rush to getting this stuff out to market, like the autonomous cars. Okay, again, just recently the federal government has decided to reduce some of their standards that they would otherwise hold this product up to, so that they can actually get these cars out into the market quicker, because they think that autonomous cars are the future, and that with these cars we will no longer have car accidents.
Well, if you go on 84, there's no doubt that will not solve the problem.
No.
But we're not around the corner for that. But I remember when we were kids, we would talk about being able to make telephone calls with a television phone, as it is. Now we can do that with a wristwatch.
Yeah,
much.
Dick Tracy, like, with his little video watch. Yeah.
Exactly. We don't have the flying cars yet. We could, but it's not cost effective. But we're seeing even more, just at the home level, we're seeing in manufacturing, a lot of things are wired up to the internet. And the end result has been, as we saw when the centrifuges in Iraq were being used to make fissionable materials, they got hacked. The centrifuges, was it in Iran?
It was Iran.
Okay, it was Iran. We're not only talking about our homes, we're talking about remote control of pretty much anything that is connected to the internet. Now, a couple of decades ago, we saw a situation where Iran was running its centrifuges to purify nuclear fuel for making a bomb, ostensibly. And in a case like that, nobody even had to be in the building at the time. This is run completely by remote control. So in effect, criminals are able to take control of machinery. We hear power plants, telephone systems. How worried should we be as individuals? Because that's out of our hands.
Again, it's all a matter of balancing the risk versus the reward. I'm not going to say that we should be petrified over this, but I do think it's a matter of concern. Because should they take the electrical grid down, or should something happen in our manufacturing plants? You saw what I mentioned earlier about the place in New Hampshire with the DDoS attack. Those things can happen anyway. They're just going to happen a lot easier with these Internet of Things. So I think many of the manufacturers, they're using these autonomous robots, and they're using all of these machines that can make their own decisions for good. They're actually doing some great stuff. They're improving efficiencies. They're improving the ability of these manufacturers to cut costs, avoid mistakes. The old Six Sigma issue. We want to avoid every little mistake we can to reduce our expenses. And in cities, we've seen there's a city in South Korea called Songdo that has just created the entire city is going to be connected through the internet. And it's going to track everything, traffic lights, traffic patterns. It's going to change the traffic patterns as the need exists. It's not just going to be, okay, from 3 o'clock on, this lane's going to be open. If there's no need for that, it will be able to make its decision automatically to open lanes, close lanes, adjust the speed limit. So there's a lot of things, and that one's going to be really cool because it's even going to be able to tell you where the next open parking space is if you're looking to drive into town. So great stuff that we're going to be able to do with this. Now, how does that outweigh the risks? It depends on who you ask, because there's that, especially let's go back to the autonomous cars, there's that ethical question. If an autonomous vehicle is going to be so much better at driving than we are, it's probably going to reduce the number of traffic accidents astronomically. However, it's also going to be vulnerable to be hacked. And you and I've talked about this before, where that reporter got put inside an autonomous vehicle, and a professor then took over control of the car. It scared that person to death. And it would scare me to death too. So a hacker can take over a car and cause an accident on a highway, or cause it to drive into something. So you're basically giving up control to someone who might be able to get in there. The question comes in, okay, well, if we have 10,000 car accidents now, say, per day, these are just random numbers, don't hold me to them, and we can get that down to maybe 100 car accidents or 10 car accidents per day, isn't that better? Well, the other side of that coin is, are you willing to give up control of your vehicle to anyone so that you can have that lower risk of getting into just your random car accident if you're driving?
It's interesting because when I do presentations to people, I hear pretty much the same sort of scams and questions as one would typically expect from people who are not necessarily tech savvy. And the last thing's like, well, how does somebody break into a secure government site? How do people get personal information from various servers? And I think it bears explaining that up until now, you had to have sort of a closed system, which meant you isolated secure computers from the ones that are attached to the internet. Nonetheless, we're still seeing a situation where people can manage to break in without even being on site, and the computers don't even have to be hooked up to the internet.
Well, going back to the example you gave earlier with the Iran centrifuges, that was not an internet attack. That was they just dropped a whole bunch of these thumb drives around the parking lot of that building, and someone picked one up and plugged it into their computer to see what was on it, and that was it. That's all it took. So they may have been totally isolated, but all it took is one person doing the wrong thing. And, you know, obviously they had to change their protocols to make sure nobody did that, but you see it all the time. You walk through a parking lot, somebody's dropped a thumb drive. Why? You know, and I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but, you know, there's a very good chance if you plug that into your computer, you're going to get hacked.
Well, and that's also interesting because I remember that early on when the internet, let's say around 2000, there were policies in companies. You cannot bring, at the time, a floppy disk in to the company because it can get spread to other computers. And when I was a reporter, I was sent, Time Magazine's cover story was about viruses, computer viruses. Nobody had heard of them before. Now, this is a newspaper in Rhode Island where one day they discover a whole bunch of files are disappearing, and they didn't know what it was. The technicians took a look at the disk, and they looked and looked and didn't see anything. And finally, they got to the very inner part of the disk, which had important information for making the whole program work, and they found some English saying, this is the Pakistani brain virus, call such and such a number in Lahore, Pakistan, and we'll be able to get your computer working again. Yep. Their rationale for doing it was because they thought it was wrong for people to sell bootleg software, which ironically, that's what they were doing. But that was our first introduction to viruses, and I think that a lot of people thought at the time, this is just a phase, or these are college kids that are doing it, and how wrong we are. Criminals don't even have to, they don't have to hold people up, they don't have to break into your home. Nope. They could be sitting in the parking lot, as you said, or they could be on the other side of the world. It's not wrong for us to be frightened, but it's not all that bad for us. A lot of it's our behavior, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and you and I have talked about this quite a bit on my show, and we kind of joke about it. You know, the biggest thing to be thinking about when you're on the internet is don't be stupid. If you get an email from someone that you weren't expecting and it has nothing but a link in it, don't click on the link. Immediately delete it. If it was that important, they would have probably written something there, you know, personal that you would know. I remember I was in South Dakota on a business trip, and I was in an office building there, and there was a room filled with all these computers that were all connected to the main server, and we were just about to go to lunch. I was just about to go to lunch with one of the people there, and she goes, "Oh, I got an email," and she opened it up, and there was a little picture of a panda, and she goes, "Oh, what's this?" And she clicked on it, and you literally heard from that point on, every other computer in the office started going ding, 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 because it immediately sent itself out to every single person that she had in her email address book. So, you know, if she hadn't done, and now they were totally infected. Their entire office was totally infected. It was a mess. But it just happens just that fast. And that's the problem, too, with these computers. They are making these decisions, like, instantaneously, faster than, you can't undo something. The moment you let your finger off that mouse, you're done. It's that fast. So it can happen that quickly just by that simple of a mistake. You know, I'm sure the people in Iran were not happy when someone plugged a thumb drive into one of their computers. But it's that kind of stuff that, you know, it's human behavior, I think, is probably the bigger problem.
Well, then one could say that we can protect ourselves against 90% of scams, and that includes by computer. That 10% is out of our hands. Now, as we extrapolate from that, we put a lot of these wireless devices in our homes already. And the folks who are watching this are not just going to toss it out. Should they be afraid right now about somebody hacking into a thermostat or more likely a front door lock?
I mean, the potential always exists. I can't deny that. I can't tell you that it doesn't. Are you going to be a target? You got to think, you know, the percentage chance of you being a target is minuscule. Doesn't make it an easier answer when it actually happens to you. But it's a matter of being careful and expecting more from our manufacturers. I mean, because it's not just the connectivity issue and they open so many nodes and there's so many access points. It's also the protection of your personal information, your personal data. That's a big issue here. And the third one is liability. We talked a little bit about the cars. If I'm in a self-driving vehicle and that car drives into a wall or hits a child or something like that, who's responsible? Is it me? I wasn't driving. The car is responsible for that activity. Is it my insurance? Is it the manufacturer's insurance? Is it the software company's insurance? So there's a lot of these questions that need to be answered. And some of those are things like the thermometers. Are they vulnerable? And if they are, how quickly can they fix them? And who's responsible when something happens? Is it me? Is it my insurance? Or is it Google?
So at a certain point, we've got to tell folks what we can control. And I would say the best place to start, we don't hear a lot about this, is to back up your files, to watch what you're keeping on your computer, but to do a simple backup. Having a virus is bad enough, losing your files is worse, but if you have a copy of everything on a separate drive, that'll go a long way if your computer gets infected.
External drives now are so inexpensive. You could probably spend $50, maybe $100, depending on how large the drive is that you want to back up to. And there's software out there that's absolutely free. And in fact, if you buy the right external hard drive, it may come with backup software already. So it's a very simple thing to set up. How many times do you want to back it up a week? What time do you want to back it up? How many backup copies do you want to keep? And then just leave your computer on and it'll take care of itself.
And again, the advantage for folks who are watching this now is that, it's not just a question of being hacked. Computer drives have a limited lifespan. You can drop it, it can get stolen, you can lose it, and along with that, all of the photographs and videos that you hold so dear. So making a backup of your computer files is one thing. Turning the computer off at night is important because of some of the recent brownouts that we've had where people's computers have been used as remote control spam bots, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking while you were just talking too, the other option you have available to you is a off-site backup, a cloud backup, which of course means you're sending all of your information off your system through the internet to some remote computer. So that option exists, and it's real simple. And if you get a reputable company, obviously they're doing all the things right to protect the information. But yeah, having a backup in-house on of your very own, probably a good idea, at least on a monthly, if not weekly basis.
So we know backup, backup, backup. I'll say it 3 times. People do have anti-malware and antivirus software, but that's of no use if you don't maintain it and scan.
Right.
The other issues are watching your email. I've received countless emails supposedly from the Internal Revenue Service, the National Security Agency, and I think that scammers work a lot on fear, and they try and frighten us into making a quick decision. And that's one of the problems that we're facing, is just to slow down, don't click too much, and think very carefully about who that email might come from. In the last minute that we've got here, a couple of hard and fast rules other than that for folks who have a lot of computers and televisions that are all hooked together.
Well, first of all, you mentioned television. Smart TVs also have microphones in them now because you can tell it to change channels, turn it on, turn it off. Someone's collecting that information. It's going out to the internet. Everything that you get with those little echoes is going out to the internet. Everything that you do is going out to the internet. You're not going to stop that from happening. So you need to be smart. You need to take care of yourself and be safe when it comes to these things. And, just keep in mind that there are more benefits here than there are risks. But also keep in mind that there's some things that you just cannot help. If you want to have a cell phone, eventually they're going to start marketing to you on that cell phone when you walk past a particular donut shop.
And we could do another 2 hours simply on how we're being followed and how that information is collected. In fact, there's a company that's making billboards that can track us by Wi-Fi if you leave it on your phone. You pass the billboard, it says, okay, Howard's phone 1234, pass us at 4 o'clock on 84, heading towards the store. We get into the store, they already know the serial number of my phone, so they know where I'm going, when I go home. People see this as a bad thing because we don't have a choice, but there are things we can do, such as turning off location services. If you turn off your Wi-Fi, that'll help you.
Also make your phone last longer.
Make your phone last longer. And I think something that we didn't touch upon here, but it extends to computers and it extends to what we do in our everyday lives as well, and that is we've got to be very, very stingy with our personal information.
Yes. I know many, many people who won't fill out accurate information when they're asked to fill out information on a website. Where do you live? What's your favorite pet? Where'd you go to high school? And here's one, if we've got just a second or two, that drives me crazy on Facebook. you go on Facebook and they have, oh, let's play this little game, and they ask you like 20 questions. What was your best friend's name in elementary school? What was your first pet's name? Well, those are all security questions. Yeah. Those are all questions that are going to then eventually be used against you. Don't give that information out. Don't play those games. It may sound like fun, but I guarantee you, you answer those questions, someone's going to put a file together on you, and they're going to use it trying to break into your bank account. Because what questions does the bank ask you when you're setting up your security profiles?
They'll ask you the last four of your social.
Where'd you go to high school? What was your first grade teacher's name? And those are all the things that you see on those questionnaires on Facebook.
And people will go on vacation and actually say, well, we're going away for 2 weeks to the Cape, and thank you very much. And if the kids don't believe it's a risk, they'll say, all right, well, you know, your video game's going to be gone too if everything gets stolen. So one's got to be
Facebook is very dangerous. People have forgotten that, you know, you wouldn't tell that information to your next door neighbor.
Right.
But you're telling it to the world on Facebook.
So the Internet of Things, we've been using that for a while during the conversation, again, to let people understand the Internet of Things simply means objects we can control while we're not at home or not next to that object.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, it's bigger than that, but I mean, it's for us, that's really, for our consumers, that's really the biggest thing.
Well, we've hopefully not frightened too many people, but I think we've shown that this is really a question of policy. It's a question of making sure the manufacturers understand the risks. They probably do at this point. And we're also moving into an area now to make logins a lot more secure. Up until now, it's usually an email address and a password, but we're looking at biometrics. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. A biometric is something that's unique to you, like a fingerprint or your eye print, where instead of having to type in a password or type in a code or an email, you can just put your thumb. And if you have an iPhone, and I think Android devices might do this as well, instead of typing in a number, you can just put your thumb on it or any finger that you choose, and that will unlock your device for you. Very secure. There's basically no way they can be beat unless you're watching a Mission Impossible movie. So that's probably the next wave in security. It's getting much, much better. I remember having a laptop back in 2006, 2008 that actually had a thing where you could swipe your thumb on it, and it took about 4 or 5 swipes for it to actually read it. But now with my phone, I can literally just open it right up in a half a second just by laying my thumb on the button.
Back then, the computers were not as fast as they are now. I remember plugging in one of those fingerprint sensors, and it took roughly a half hour before it knew who I was. But things have sped up since then.
Yeah, just a bit.
And right now, we have what's called dual factor authentication. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what that's about?
If you set this up, like with a Gmail account, for example, you can set it up that if you sign on from a computer that you've not signed on from in the past, it will send a code to your cell phone that you then have to type that code in so that you can get into your account. It's actually a great thing. I use it all the time because I'm on all kinds of different computers where I'm moving around.
Sounds like more work to do, but we need it to be safe.
It does.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you.
And that's it for this edition of Better Business Bureau's Smart Consumer. I'd like to thank our guest, Steve Noxxon, who's an information technology expert, for taking the time to join us today. So please share what you learned from our show with members of your family, your friends, colleagues, and neighbors, because education is the ultimate tool to protect ourselves. Better Business Bureau Serving Connecticut, and I would like to thank Nutmeg TV for the opportunity to bring our show to you, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on BBB's Smart Consumer. Be sure to join us right here.